You've got questions, we've got answers.
And I think that makes your pathway to university a lot easier.
The brain,
A voice.
Especially the first year if you pick the right subjects in year 11 and 12.
Information.
Here, and those signals run down through the spine.
Here
They
in
then
our
exit
studio,
from these
we'll be
spinal
bringing you
nerves
the
which
answer to
proceed
these
through
questions
here.
and more.
Spinal nerve.
Join us for InfoMate. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another edition of InfoMate. Today we'll be talking about science and creation with an in-depth look at the scientific viewpoints on the creation of the universe and the evolution of man. With the creation of the universe, the Big Bang Theory is the prevailing model for the universe from the earliest known periods to today. It basically states that the universe was in a small dense state at one point and then expanded from there. While the theory of evolution is the common view on the evolution of species, the commonly held scientific belief is that we split from the chimpanzee branch over millions of years and evolved into the Homo sapiens we are today. But what are the Islamic beliefs on these subjects, on the creation of the universe or the origin of man? To help us answer these questions and to discuss the topics of science and creation and Islam, we are joined here today with Murabi Wadood Janud and brother Ramzan Sharif. Jazakallah for joining us on today's show.
Pleasure being here.
Now, the Big Bang Theory, it's a broad topic. You know, what does it encompass? What does it mean? Now, brother Ramzan, I'll come to you this one. How would you define the Big Bang Theory for our viewers?
The first thing we need to understand is that the Big Bang Theory, it is a theory. It is not experimental in a lab. And I think it would be amazing if we are able to see this theory in front of our eyes. But that is impossible because we will have to go back 13.7 billion years in the past.
Wow.
And according to science, that is when the universe originated. And the universe originated with this Big Bang Theory. So if you look at scientific facts, it tells us that split seconds, it is even referred to as fractions and fractions of a second, when in a very, very small speck of a mass, a massive explosion happened.
Okay.
And from that beyond, it evolved. The universe formed from there. So when you look at the Big Bang Theory, according to the science, we look at the origin of the universe. That's what we're referring to.
Okay, and that's the view that when we go to school, when we're being taught as we're being raised, that's the view that everyone's being presented with when they're coming to
It's a
school?
generally accepted view, and according to the origin of the universe. But then science also tells us that universe from that point on, from that split second point onwards, it started to expand. So from that Big Bang, we talk about the expanding universe theory as well.
Okay, so do you mind enlightening? What are we talking about when we're saying the universe is expanding?
If you again go back to 13.7 billion years, that scene that was created in that fraction of a second, I think if you look at 13.7 billion years backwards, whatever happened in that small span of time, I think that was the major evolvement of the universe. And after that, the universe keeps on expanding. The way I try and teach this to the students in the high school is to use an example. We try and use a model. That's how we try and explain theories. And that expanding universe could be explained by inflating a balloon. So if you put few spots on the balloon and you try and inflate it, you will see that all those points on the balloon, they're moving away from each other. So that explains the expanding universe theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Murabi Saab, from an Islamic point of view, what do we look at when we say the creation of the universe?
First of all, it's only 13.7 billion years ago, so it's not that long ago. But just what Ramzan Sahib, what he said, that knowledge that has only come to us in the last, Ramzan Sahib, 50 years or so?
About that, I'd say so.
Even less probably.
Yeah.
So this knowledge that we have, it's only in the last couple of decades. However, the Quran, nearly 1500 years ago, Quran says in chapter Al-Anbiya, that's chapter 21, I believe, and God says in the Quran that Inna samawata wal arza,
that surely the heavens and the earth, so all creation essentially, kanata ratqa, that they were a closed up mass, and then fafataknahuma, and then we opened them.
Wow.
And then, the Quran does not stop there. Just as you talked about expansion of the universe, how it's always expanding.
Yep.
And again, that's something we only know in the last decade.
Okay.
But that's something that Quran again mentioned, 1500 years ago in Az-Zariyat, where it talks about how the universe, it's always expanding. And it's just, astounding to see that 1500 years ago in the sands of Arabia, such knowledge was revealed, such divine knowledge was revealed
Wow.
to mankind, which we're only celebrating in this part of the world in the last couple of decades.
Very true. Two things I'll pick from what Murabi Sahib was just mentioning. The Hubble telescope. Hubble telescope was one of the biggest things that happened in the astronomical world. And that came about in 1920s. And a lot of observations and a lot of research were enhanced after that. And that led more concrete evidence how the universe is expanding. But the point is this, as Murabi Sahib was saying, that when you go back 13.7 billion years, science hasn't got an answer beyond 13.7. What we say is the universe started during that time. It doesn't go before that time.
Okay. Now, with Islam, do we also believe the relative timelines involved in this, or is there a differing view here?
We definitely do, but I would just like to take back to what Ramzan Sahib, what he just talked about. The words that God has used in the Quran, they so clearly and evidently describe what essentially Big Bang was.
Yeah.
And, I would also like to point out that Islam is the only religion, that has presented this theory.
Okay.
Some religions out there are still believing creation over, a number of 6 days, 7 days.
Yeah.
This theory, it was presented by Islam, and when this theory was made public in the Western world, religious groups, they're rejected, not only rejected, but persecuted those people who are presenting such theories.
Yeah.
So, Islam, I always say this, and I'm a huge believer of this, that Islam throughout time has, always stood parallel with science. It has always presented facts and figures which were beyond its time, which again shows it being a divine book, it being divinely revealed. And secondly, Islam always promoting what science says and scientific facts, which we have only been celebrating in the past couple of decades, but were in fact told to Muslims, not only Muslims, but told to the world about 1500 years ago.
Wow. So it's amazing to see that we learned about these things 1500 years ago, and science is only just catching up now and presenting the same things that were already presented in the Quran so long ago.
We are basically wetting our feet on the side of the ocean.
Okay.
That is how deep science is.
Wow.
So as things come to our knowledge, we have more and more concrete evidence, and science evolves as we try and understand more and more about the universe.
And I always, just to add something, I always imagine what Muslims would have thought, say 100 years ago, let alone, 1500 years ago, when they read in the Quran that in the samawati wal arda, that heavens and earth, they were closed up mass, and then God, rent them asunder, God, ripped them open.
Wow.
I mean, just imagine what Muslims would have thought what this, really means. And then once, science presented 1500 years later, when it finally presented the Big Bang Theory, that's where Muslims, said, wait a second, this is what, God mentioned about 1500 years ago.
Yeah. So it's
And then same thing with the expansion of universe as well. In Az-Zariyat, it's mentioned that universe, it's ever expanding. And just imagine what Muslims would have thought 1500 years ago.
Well, that's right.
But now when science is telling us this, we can say that this is what Quran told us.
Well,
And
so,
the Holy Quran is a book of science. There you go. It's a proven fact.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a book of science, a book for all time as
That's
well.
right.
That's why you just don't realise some of these things until after the fact. Or only
Exactly.
recently have things become clear enough that people can make that connection.
Exactly. And this is an ongoing process. I mean, it's not only related to, creation, the Big Bang, universe expanding. Even these days, when there are, new scientific discoveries that are being made, people are realizing, wait a second, this was mentioned in the Quran as well.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's an ongoing
right.
process, which again shows that it's a book. It's a book, for all time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we covered, in general terms, the creation of the universe from the Big Bang Theory to the Islamic point on this sort of stuff. Now, after the creation of the universe, obviously, came the creation of the solar system and the creation of man, according to the scientific viewpoints on this. So, Brother Ramzan, I'll come to you for this one. What's the current view on the creation of man from a science point of view?
See, we have to try and understand evolution. So initially it's the evolution of the universe which merges onto the evolution of beings coming to the human being. So going back 13.7 billion years, we say that the solar system, that is just looking at our planets, the 8 or 9 planets, there's still question marks there now. In our solar system, the solar system came to be in the last 4.6 billion years. And the evolution within this solar system or within the Earth goes back to about 3.6 billion years when we talk about single cells. And then the single cells evolved into multiple, multicellular organisms, and then there were all the plants and animals, all the classifications of those which came about to be very close to human beings. Now before that, there's still, science is talking about different things, whether it was one set route in terms of reaching human being, from single cell to multiple cells and then to human being. How did it happen? There's still a lot of discussion going on about this. What is Islam saying in terms of how evolution was in that span of time?
Okay. So when we say evolution, what are we talking about? Are we saying that mankind came from, well, what I mentioned in the intro was that they've come from the chimpanzee branch. Now, where does that theory come into it?
See, again, we talk about a theory. And when we talk about a theory, we cannot do this in a lab in front of our eyes and try and see what's happening there. But there are numerous ways of understanding things in terms of what evolution is. Now, one of the greatest scientists that came to be was Darwin. And this theory of evolution is very much explained by Darwin when he wrote Origin of the Species back in 1859. And he tried to explain evolution in terms of moving from that single cell to multiple cells and then right down to human beings now. But and then he had different ways of explaining that. So in his one of the amazing things is when he used this example of whales. And the example he gave was the whales came about from North American the bears. And he said these bears, because they were pretty much keen on getting the insects from the waterways, and slowly they became whales. During his time, when he wrote the first edition, it was pretty much ridiculed by people who had this theory from him. Yep. And then the science now says probably his idea was correct, but the animals were wrong. Probably it should have been cows turning into hippopotamus or something like that. Yeah. So the evolution, that idea stayed with us. And the general science world today still beholds that idea of evolution, the Darwinian theory of evolution. Okay. That's what we stick to.
All right. Now, Murabi Saab, we've got the scientific view on the evolution of man and where this evolution of species came about. Now, more specifically, Islam, what are our beliefs on how species and man came about after that?
Well, you see, I think if we just look at what we talked about earlier in regards to the Big Bang Theory about, this universe coming to creation, Islam, from the step one has proven and showed that, things are created in different stages. It promotes and it mentions in chapter 21 the Big Bang Theory. And the fact that it mentions that shows that, Islam agrees with that creation is in stages. This is again something that God has mentioned in chapter 67 in the very beginning. I believe it's the second and third verse. Allah says that creation is in stages. It's never instant. Just how this universe wasn't instant, it took 13.7 billion years, as Ramzan Saab mentioned earlier, to come to its present state. Likewise, creation naturally also went through stages. And this is again something that we can realize if we just look at God's attributes. Surah Al-Hashr, the last verse, God says, Huwallahu al-Khaliqul Bariul Mustabbiru. That now these three attributes, I essentially believe that it shows that God not only creates, but He takes creation from different stages to its present form, or if you want to say perfection. He's the Khaliq, He's the creator, He's the body, which means He's the maker as well. And then He's also Mustabbir, which means He's the fashioner. So this shows that process, that no creation, nothing in this universe essentially is instant.
Yeah.
It has to go through stages. So naturally, Islam agrees with evolution. Islamic teachings throughout the Quran agree with evolution, that things have gone through different stages to exist in the present form that they're in.
Okay.
See, what really happens is Darwin tried to explain evolution, and what we understand today in terms of science, what evolution is, there's two different types of evolution. One is microevolution, the other is macroevolution. When we say microevolution, we're talking about little changes, change in the skin color, change in the size, change in the appearance, and that's called microevolution. Macroevolution is change of species. Now, when Darwin was doing his research, there was I think he was short of talking about mutation, because as we talked about these things earlier, that science is evolving as well.
Yeah.
A lot of things are evolving. And what we get to know from there is that the species have been mutated along the way. And if you look at evolution, which is just haphazard, which is chaotic, which just happens from point one to point B, without any superpower, without any control over that evolution, over that line, and it's just a blind evolution, then it could be just haphazard. We could be different species sitting here. We could be something else. There's no control over this, So that's where the Holy Quran comes in, which tries to correct the science. So correction of science is one of the things that the Holy Quran does very effectively.
And just to add on that, science or Darwin's theory, or people who do support that side of evolution, the theory, they say that it's all through natural selection, that essentially it was all an accident.
And it's also called survival of the fittest.
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
So these terms are also essential in understanding what evolution really is.
That's
and
right.
what Islam says, and what one scientific theory says. Not all scientists are unanimous on this theory.
Mhm.
There are some, who do agree as to what the Quran says, that this natural selection or the survival of the fittest, it cannot be an accident. 13.7 billion years of evolution for us to be, sitting here was not an accident.
No.
There's so many variables that could have happened. If you just look at the Watchman's theory, for example, that's something that I always quote as well.
That's right.
And the Watchman's theory is that can a person, with any common sense, can he sincerely believe that all these different intricate pieces of a watch, all these dials and pieces, could they naturally, over 13 billion years or X amount of years, could they naturally come together, form a watch, form 3 needles, form 1 to 12, form a band, and then tell time as well? This is where the Quran says that it's not natural selection, it's divine selection, it's divine decree
That's
that
right.
went into this.
That's right. And it's logic as well. Simple human logic.
Wow.
To make a jumbo jet, if we throw all the pieces there, do you think it's going to form that jumbo jet which is operated the way we operate that in this age and time?
Yeah.
So, and you look at the complexity of human eye.
Wow.
There has to be a superpower who is designing these things. It cannot be just haphazard. And the exemplification that is often used by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi, rahmatullah ta'ala, is whether it's a game of chance or it is a game of chess. So when you talk about game of chance, then we're rolling the dice. It could go anywhere. Anything could fall there. Any direction could be set. And when we say it is a game of chess, there is some brain power behind that. There is some thought process behind that. And evolution had a major thought process of design behind it, which explains divine power. So that is what evolution
So,
is.
Murabi Sahib, I'll come to you with one particular question that comes to my mind as we're talking about this, is that people always mention that, Christianity and Islam, they mention man was formed from a drop of clay, a drop of earth. How does that come about into it? Where have those theories or quotes come from?
So, again, Islam, again, with the teaching of Islam, they're completely parallel to science.
Yeah, of course.
These days when, we have these spacecrafts which are, going to Pluto, now they're going beyond our solar system. Few things essentially to look for in order to look for life. That is water, first of all. First and foremost, they look for water. Wherever there's water, there's a possibility of life.
Yep.
And secondly, secondly, they look for, again, oxygen and, of course, other things which support life. But that's something that, Quran mentioned as well.
Yep.
Quran says that everything has been created from water.
Yeah.
The Quran also says that, human beings, they have been created from clay. Now, this does not mean that literally human beings were formed out of clay, but it does mean that we are from this earth. Even when earth, when it was being formed, in that 13 billion year process,
Yep.
Human beings did not, just get dropped on this earth. We were created from this earth. We were created by everything that existed on this earth. So that's what Quran is saying, that water, that's, everything that is in creation, this universe, it's from water. Secondly, that human beings and creation in general is from clay, in the sense that you are created from this earth, that you were not just, dropped here.
Yep.
When earth was suitable for living.
Yeah. Okay, so it supports the scientific. What we believe is it's always parallel to the scientific views in these.
And that's the unique thing that, Islam, if you look at its history, it has never stood against science. And if you compare that to Christianity, where it has not only stood against science, but it has also persecuted scientists.
Yep.
Galileo, for example, was imprisoned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Galileo, he was imprisoned
For
for blasphemy, because he presented the theory that, it's not the sun that is revolving around the earth. In fact, it's the earth that is revolving around the sun.
Wow.
And the church declared that, blasphemy, and imprisoned him.
Wow.
So Islam is the only religion that has throughout time, always stood hand in hand with science. And that's proven through the golden age of the Muslim era, where in medicine, in physics, in mathematics, in astronomy, Muslims excelled, and they always related their discoveries and their advancements to the Quran. They would always say that this knowledge was in fact ignited or rekindled through our study of this book, of this divine book.
That's right. And if you want to bring that long billion-year process of science, of evolution, and try and understand what that evolution is, all you got to look at is a child who is incepted from single cells, and then a child is born as a human being. So that 9-month process that the child is in the womb of the mother, that could be a snapshot of that evolution of billions of years we're trying to understand.
Okay, that's a
From
very good
single
example.
cells to a fully
Again,
fledged human being.
Again, something that
That's
Quran
right.
mentioned in Surah Al-Mu'minun in
Yep.
the first, in the first 10 verses. God has categorically mentioned each and every single step of creation of a child in a mother's womb, from that sperm to it being fertile, and then the process it goes through.
Wow.
And in 1980s, I know this because I've lived in Canada, I've studied there. At the York University, a professor, he wrote a paper, and he took these 6 verses from the Quran, these 6 steps of pregnancy, of how a child is created. And he said that it's so astonishing that how 1500 years ago, this book has mentioned these steps of a child which he goes through in a mother's womb, when this is something that we've only found out in the last couple of decades, after we had the microscope, after we had the science and the medicine to look into a mother's womb and see what happens there.
That's right.
Wow.
So let's say science is catching up with the Holy Quran.
That's a good way to put it, isn't it? Now, what I'm trying to think about when we're talking about this evolution is you always hear about Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve. Where do they come into that? What's that? Is that the Christianity view on this point? How are we looking at that one?
So, Christians believe, and in fact Muslims as well.
That's
and
right.
this is where, I will delve into this a bit more, that Adam and Eve were the first human beings. How in the last 6,000 years, Adam and Eve, they came, Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, came about 6,000 years ago. And how this about 7 billion population of the world is from those initial two individuals, Adam and Eve. Again, this is something that the Quran categorically rejects. It's something that Quran completely speaks against. The Quran never says that Adam and Eve, Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, was the first human being. And in fact, even within Bible, we can find evidence which clearly promotes that Adam and Eve, they were not the first human beings.
Okay.
That's very true.
And to say that 7 billion people, they came about in a span of 6,000 years, that again is against any form of logic or rationale.
The mathematics doesn't hold.
No.
Yeah, the mathematics, exactly, they don't add up. What Quran says, however, and what the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, we believe in the promised Messiah who has come and rectified even within Muslims these false notions that had creeped up. And one such notion being, of course, Adam and Eve being the first human beings. Prophet Muhammad has said that they were not the beginning of creation, they were the beginning of our spirituality. Adam and Eve was that point in time where God deemed humanity fit enough to receive revelation, to recognize that there is a creator.
That's right.
Wow.
So, and that happened 6,000 years ago.
Okay.
God does not say that they were the first human beings.
Yep.
They were the first human beings where, in regards to God's manifestation upon
So
man.
what we can take away from this is that with the creation of the universe, we're looking at the Big Bang Theory where the universe started in a single point, exploded, and is still expanding to today. And the Islamic view on that we support it. It's the same thing. You mentioned the quotes and the verses that the universe expanded over such a long period, 13.7 billion years, and continues to do so today. Now, Murabi Sahib, when we talked about the evolution of the universe and the evolution of man, what other forms of evolution come to your mind?
Evolution exists around us. And it's not only limited to the physical world, it's not only limited to creation, but also religion, it went through evolution. If you look at the time of Adam, 6,000 years ago, why is it that God did not reveal Quran being, the final step in regards to God's manifestation and guidance for mankind? Why is it that God did not reveal it 6,000 years ago, so that 6,000 years of human race could benefit from such a complete book of guidance? And the answer is evolution.
That's right.
Mankind 6,000 years ago could not have comprehended such a complex and a complete book of guidance that Quran is. So mankind, they went through that 6,000 years of evolution, and religion also went through that evolution, again according to divine decree. Adam was revealed the first law, which was only very a brief understanding of God, what God essentially is. Mankind was told that God is this entity, and he can be recognized through such and such attributes. That's why in the Quran God says that Adam was given just a few names, a few isma for to remember God. Then thousands, about 1400 years later, Noah came. Noah was given the second law, a much more comprehensive law. It was given the 7 Noahide laws, and again a understanding of God was presented in a much better form than it was, say, thousands of years ago when it was presented to Adam.
Okay.
Then again, as mankind progressed, the human mind evolved, then Moses came, and he was given a much more comprehensive law than was given to Noah. And then again, time progressed, 1400 years passed, and then Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came. And at that time, God, knew that mankind would be able to not only accept, realize, but also follow Quran, being the final step in the guidance from the divine, being the final book for guidance and for the whole of time. So this shows the evolution of religion parallel with the human evolution and also the evolution of the human mind.
Well, so we've covered such excellent topics. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We've mentioned the creation of the universe and how that's evolved and how science and Islam are parallel beliefs on that. The evolution of man and how they've evolved together, and even the evolution of religion and how the human mind evolved to be able to comprehend the Quran in its final form.
Of course.
So that's excellent. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Murabi Saab and Brother Ramzan.
Pleasure.
Jazakallah.
Thank you.
Pleasure being here.
The creation of the universe is a topic that has one prominent scientific view and many religious and cultural beliefs. Our Islamic view supports the prevailing scientific view, with the universe being created from a single dense area and then exploding to what we call the Big Bang. With the origin of man, we also have several prevailing theories and cultural beliefs, with science saying that we have evolved from lesser beings, and Islam also talking about how we have evolved from lesser beings over a very long period of time into the humans that exist today. We should help teach our children how and where Islam supports science and in the different beliefs that it supports, and show them, most importantly, why we believe these things. I hope that we have been able to teach you something in regards to science and creation and where we as Ahmadi Muslims stand on the subject. Thanks very much for watching. We look forward to bringing you another episode of InfoMate from MTA International, Australia Studios. Jazakumullah and Khudafis.